All right. Takes a second.
Gosh, I can't believe you do this all the time. This is like nervous.
All right, and we are live. Hello, ladies, and welcome to this afternoon's broadcast on the making of the smartest person in the room. Today we have Salwa Ibrahim.
That's right.
And Salwa is with Mesh Ventures. And we are actually super stoked to have you with us today, Salwa. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So today we are asking our guests, what do we need to know to be the smartest person in the room when it comes to your area of expertise, which is manufacturing? So tell us, what do we need to know as manufacturers or women interested in getting into manufacturing, as dispensaries, as distributors, as anyone who actually has to come into contact with manufacturers? What are the various things we need to know to be the smartest person in the room?
Well, there's a bunch of different things to take into consideration, especially right now, and particularly in California, as this market sort of grows and expands and all the different money that's sort of flowing to it. The competition's really fierce. So if you are a woman who's looking to get into this space, who doesn't know much about the science of cannabis or manufacturing, I would suggest starting at a different point in the supply chain. Manufacturing is really tough. It's an art and it's a science. And not only is there like a lot of different ways to skin the cat, being like ethanol or different solvents or any of that type to get to actually process cannabis. There's also, you know, all the licensing and all the fees and the permitting, not just from like the cannabis side of it, but from like your local jurisdictions and dealing with those solvents. It's really a lot. It's a cumbersome task and it's very, very expensive. Usually or in the past, dispensaries got to deal with manufacturers directly. But now obviously with the new regulations, they're dealing with the distributors. So right now, I think a lot of manufacturers who are getting into this space are obviously developing relationships with the distributors and the distribution folks. And whether that they are going to the distributors with their own brands or they're white labeling other brands, it's really sort of that relationship is becoming absolutely critical. And so when we're talking about the different kinds of manufacturing, obviously scale and scalability is important, especially in California. We're seeing a trend going towards ethanol distillation just because of the quantity and the efficiencies.
Before you go on, can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, forgive me, I am not a scientist. I am, and by no means like in there. But however, my understanding of it is that you can do larger quantities and getting more consistent value through an ethanol distillation versus a CO2 distillation or a different type of solvent.
Okay.
So I feel like that's something to consider. One thing that we are seeing too is obviously like with the white labeling is becoming a stronger way to go, stronger route. So then that way your manufacturing processes aren't tied to a particular brand. Because if, for instance, you have your own brand and you're manufacturing and you're creating your own extracts for your brand, well, what happens if your brand fails and you have a bunch of extracts? And unfortunately, your extracts and your supply is sort of tied to this one particular brand. You know, it's hard to foresee why brands fail or why they don't move as much as we'd like them to. So being able to have a little bit of flexibility is important. And then obviously like having a consistent source of biomass to be able to feed into your manufacturing process is key. So obviously on one side of the coin, your relationship with the distributor is extremely important. But on the other side of the coin, it's all of the biomass and the feed that goes into these machines and having a consistent supply of it and being able to negotiate on quantity and price point and not being beholden to fluctuations in the market as best as possible. So you're able to have that consistent supply is important. Because that's ultimately what a distributor is looking for, right? Like they want to see that you have a strong brand, that you're able to support your brand, and that if they do take you on, you're able to provide a consistent supply to feed their stores.
So let me ask you a little bit about white labeling. So that's the concept of creating a product that you then allow other people to put their brand on.
Yeah.
Is this something, we see it a lot in software where someone will build a site and then allow others to put their branding on top of it. It's a pretty common thing in other industries. Is there a lot of viability for that in this industry to white label?
I believe so. Where I actually think it's a very interesting segment of the market. There's in kind of expanding on what manufacturing is. There's a company that we've invested in. They're out of Oregon. They are called Gesundheit Foods, and effectively what they do is, I know it's a funny name, but they're really great. So effectively what they do is just white label any type of edible or drink or powder drink or anything like that. You can find something in a mainstream market, say it's like a beverage of any kind, and you say like, hey, I want this, but I want CBD and I want it to have this effect and I want it to hit you then and I want it to be water soluble or whatever it may be. And effectively, like, they formulate it for you, you give them the design and the packaging, and then they essentially white label it for you, which is absolutely genius, because if I were coming into the market right now and I have a brand that I believe in, I certainly don't want to waste my startup capital trying to figure out licensing and paying for rent and figuring out how to use heavy machinery and then waiting for it to come on a truck and then getting staff and then making, what I mean? All those things. I would far more rather spend that money on my packaging and my branding and the support of the packaging and the branding, and then essentially handing it off to an expert who knows exactly what to do that I can rely on to, again, create a consistent product.
That's really interesting. That I can see where that would be a really much safer way to go. And even to start out, if you weren't necessarily able to, because it's expensive to create
in this
a brand.
Industry is so expensive.
It is no joke. I mean, it's probably 2 or 3 times the average to start a business. I know that as a cultivator, you have to have at least $250,000 to just consider your application. So if you can kind of bypass a lot of that, having to set up your co-packer and manufacturing and formulation and all of that, and work with somebody in a white label, I think that's really smart.
Yeah, and that's kind of when I do have the fortune of being able to speak to women who are trying to get into this space. That's often what I encourage, because typically it's like some folks, especially like they're new in this industry, like they don't really know exactly what they want to do. So it gives them sort of an idea of being able to kind of play around a bit more without having to make a large financial commitment. And it would be really hard if you're new in this space and you kind of like set down a path and you're like, oh, I'm going to be a cultivator. And then you kind of go down and then you decide that's not really what your passion is and you'd rather be doing something else. Sort of the flexibility of like having a brand, designing a brand, really being focused on what that brand means, and then finding an expert to help you fulfill that brand. Although you're never going to make the margin if you were sort of soup to nuts, I quite frankly don't think it matters. I think you can back into that, right? So,
and it's interesting too, because then you can really develop the brand, which is something that at least in the California market, we're really missing. We've got a handful of brands, but we don't have a lot of real brands that, I have people all the time, hey, can you recommend something? I'm in Northern California, they're in Southern California. Well, I don't know if my regional products are going to be available.
It's totally true. And even from like a medical standpoint, that's where it kind of hurts the most. I've got this woman who's stage 4 and she just really wanted a good source of oil. And unfortunately, she lives in LA and I'm just not familiar with that market. And I went online, I'm on Weedmaps and trying to look at everybody's menus. And then we had the July 1st deadline, which obviously like created a lot of shifts with what dispensaries were able to offer. And yeah, it would be really nice to have a source, particularly in the medical side, that people could just rely on, that's consistent up and down the state.
All right, ladies, are you listening? There are some options. All right, let's talk about something on the other side, which is licensing. Mm-hmm. What are you seeing when it comes to actual licensing? Not white labeling where you're taking someone else's product, put your brand on it, but you're taking your formulation and you're allowing others to manufacture it in other states.
Ooh, like out of state licensing deals? gosh, that one's really tricky. Um, it's less tricky when you're dealing with like a manufactured good, like an edible or something like that, because that's fairly simple. Like there's a formula and a recipe and you just sort of follow it. Where it gets tricky is on the flower and the flower production. We're going through that right now with one of our brands, Lemonade, where we actually just launched Lemonade in Seattle this last weekend, or maybe 2 weekends ago. And that relationship has been interesting. It was already a strain that was growing up there, and essentially it was successful enough that it warranted its own brand. But yeah, how the genetics move. Once essentially a partner has that genetic, they've got that genetic, right? So that relationship has to be really tight. I don't think anyone has those contracts completely nailed down and figured out for all the unforeseeables. But I know that there's a ton of groups that are working on that. And I think that that's where it starts getting interesting, right? Where our group at Mesh Ventures is trying to do that, right? Where they're like doing multi-state launches and figuring out who our partners are in these different states. And there's a lot of good retail partners who have cultivation that's tied to them and effectively like have a manufacturing arm that can then produce. It's going to be an interesting challenge. And I think that we're going to see a lot of ups and downs as brands sort of figure that out. But for those of us who are like kind of watching it and looking at it, like there'll be a lot of learning in the next year for sure.
I expect that will be the case. Yeah. So is there anything else that you've noticed about what's happening in manufacturing since we've got 2 things that have happened this year. First of all, in California, January, we actually turned the page and became recreationally legal. And then we've had what I spoke with Heather Schaefer. Was it? No, I've had a lot of interviews recently. Okay. I spoke with someone who was telling me about the extinction event. And that's what they're calling it because we have this packaging issue that started July 1st, where we're now, we've got fewer products on the shelves. We've got product makers who can't keep up because they have had to trash their inventory. So between these 2 huge events in our industry in California this year, has anything surprised you when it comes to manufacturing? Do you see some challenges we have ahead? Are there any optimistic things? Kind of give me a kind of an overview of what you've seen with these changes in our market recently.
It's been really interesting to watch Select Oil come into the market, and from just like a volume standpoint, kind of come out of nowhere, really figure out how to do ethanol distillation or whatever distillation process that they use, like really, really well. And then effectively work on just going all over the market versus on capturing price points. And also with the fact that they have CBD, which has allowed them to go into like some retail grocery stores and things like that, in addition to delivery services and dispensaries. Like that one's been interesting to watch and kind of a sort of fascinating, if you will. As far as like sort of the disruption that has happened in this space, I think that a lot of the brands that there's a good chunk of brands that have been around for a while, and it's been hard to see them kind of get hit with this. And if you're like, well, if these guys are getting hit with this, then like a lot of us don't really have a shot, you know what I mean? Or a lot of the space doesn't. But it's a kind of a really good reset button, I think, for a lot of these brands where like everyone kind of is like forced to sort of restart and then kind of come on the same level and playing field. There's one other thought I had, but I forgot it. I don't know.
Okay, well, I'll ask you another question. Are there any trends that you're seeing in products right now?
Yeah, I think that, well, one of the things that we work on in Mesh Brands and Mesh Ventures is like effectively what we're seeing is sort of how people are interacting with their vapes and their vape pens and how they use it and having it fit into their lifestyle a little bit more. Whereas before it was like it was like, you know, if you, from a recreational perspective, you use it like to party. Well, like, can you use it for anti-anxiety or get your day started? Or how does it sort of make you maybe a better parent or a better spouse or a better partner? I think people are really interested in what's going inside of their vape pen. I think people are going to start catching up to like figuring out like what's in it, where does it come from, sort of similar to wine, where like, you know, the story of that is going to become more and more important. We see a lot of the brands coming from Humboldt really owning their Humboldt name, Humboldt Brothers and Humboldt's Finest and Humboldt Legends and all these different brands. I think people are going to want to know more about the process and less are going to be less mystified with the mystique of cannabis when it becomes more regulated.
That's interesting. So with vaping, are you seeing, as people are using it in this way, any new innovations in the delivery mechanism itself, in the batteries and the cartridges and what goes in the cartridges?
I think that what goes in the cartridges, certainly. I think that very quickly people are going to want to see their oil and see what it looks like and make sure that it's like as pure as possible. I think that people care about the taste. I think people are starting to care about terpenes and how they interact with your body and what they mean, and sort of what the promise is behind like the terpene formulation and what you're actually feeling. I think consistency, as we've always seen in the past, is going to just continue to be just as important. I think with women, the less stuff you have, the better. So for instance, like, I don't know, like, I mean, whatever, I'm not gonna make general statements, but a lot of women would prefer the convenience of just pulling out a pre-roll versus like having to roll your own joint. Or if you have a vape pen and you've got like a battery and a plug and a case and a thread and then it leaks and then this, I think a one-hitter disposable is going to become more and more popular. And then also, as we've seen with Dosist, I think Dosist is crushing it because so many women, especially who are new to cannabis, just love the comfort of knowing exactly what they're getting and like how much is a dose. And I think it's really important. Right? That's, I mean, the proof's in the pudding. They're killing it.
They are, and I love my Dosist pen. I have my sleep pen by my bed. I know exactly how much I need. I know I can feel it when it's working, and I get a great night's sleep. Yes. So being able to create that kind of consistency, I think, is extremely important in that product manufacturing going forward. Is there anything else that you're seeing in terms of types of products that are hitting the market that are maybe surprising you or exciting you, or you didn't really expect to see?
No, I think at this point I've expected to see pretty much everything. I think that I think beauty is going to be a category that like is going to be more and more prevalent. I think how we get access to medicine is going to change. Like the retail models are going to, I think, shift quite a bit. I think what I like and the trend that I foresee that I think is probably more it's coming up is really this sort of idea of you could be a good mom and use cannabis, right? Like that's still totally taboo, right? Like that whole idea of you can microdose and like still be present with your kid and read the same book 100 times in a night. Like I think that that's going to become more part of the conversation, which I think from a policy standpoint is going to be very important because as we've seen throughout history, women change policy, right? So as soon as you start activating these moms into understanding like why cannabis was illegal in the first place, how it's benefiting my life, how it's changed my health, how it's becoming part of my like how I relax, and then activating these people into becoming more excited about and engaged in public policy, I think will be really effective and kind of the last little push we need.
It's interesting because it will also give sorry, I just noticed that we were not recording. That's not good. So it opens up the fact then that there will be a whole segment of baby products or products geared towards mommies. I mean, just as you're talking, I'm thinking, wow, you know, we have a bunch of babies in our family, and I bet it would really help their diaper rash. And so if we're looking at how can you be a parent while consuming, that will inevitably extend then to how do I use these products now to help my child?
Yeah, I would say one step at a time. I think we need to get the mamas on board first. And I think once the mamas are on board, then we can inch in that direction. But for right now, it's definitely like I could just see like a lot of the women that I speak to in the area that I live in, it's like they don't want to drink wine every night, but they need something to kind of help take the edge off, right? So, and plus the calories and the hangover, they don't want their kids seeing them drinking wine. You know, there's a lot of things. It's an interesting shift that I'm like tuning into. I have a 2-year-old, so I'm a little bit more aware of it.
Well, but it's legit. I mean, we host several elementas here where
there you go. Yeah.
And every single time the parenting conversation, it inevitably comes up. And I see that this, you know, this is the first conversation I've had about this, but I'm kind of putting all these moments together in my head and realizing, yeah, the mommy market over the next couple of years really is going to be a hot segment in manufacturing.
I certainly agree, especially like, you know, it's funny. I was talking to my sister, not to like put her on blast, but she's been really into the Petraments. Christy over at Kiva just does a fantastic job. And she was just telling, she's like, it makes doing the dishes so much more fun, you know, and it's like, that's just what she needs to be like, just, you know, a little happier.
So do you think that women are going to be the driving market?
We're already seeing that. We're definitely seeing that in the data sets and in the trends. Like women are a growing market, which fantastic. And then I think like whoever's listening to this call and cares about this space, like get a team that like really understands how to pull data and understand the consumer really, really well before you make any type of investments, because although it is a growing market, it's a niche market and there's like specific things that women like. They don't like just everything, right? And then also seniors is the next big growing segment of the market for sure.
Yes. And what's interesting is that we're seeing the women over 40 are the ones who are buying the products for the seniors about 20 to 30% of the time, because, you know, they are the ones that are introducing that generation to cannabis. So the VIA is women 30 to 40 years old who have older parents who are also bringing it to their spouse, their kids. And, you know, it's really is interesting watching the senior group take an interest in cannabis. And
then also too, it's like, it's amazing to me if you look at the data sets of like what how women are spending money, or how much of the wealth of this nation that they're controlling and are continuing to control. They're going to be, I think it was something like by the year 2020, women are going to control up to 70-something% of the spending dollars in this country, which is insane. You can't deny it.
That is, yeah, it's kind of my soapbox. Any opportunity I get, I'm talking and preaching about the fact that women are going to drive this market as consumers for all of these reasons, because they're mommies, because they're caregivers. So really watching out for the needs of these women. I mean, I spoke with someone the other day who's going to start making tampons and who's already doing suppositories. And, you know, I said, she was asking me something, and I said, well, you know, I mean, I would get it for my mom. She said, oh, but you should get it for you because you can put it up the front end and it takes care of your cramps.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So, you know, there's a lot of room for innovation when it comes to product manufacturing in cannabis. So
it's very true. It's very, very true. Really, the sky's the limit, and you're kind of hindered on your own sort of limited thinking. But it's just it's been really interesting to watch, and I've been doing this long enough to see, like when Foria first came in, it was like my friend and I had this conversation about like cannabis lube, and then Foria came into the market, and they were like, see, that was a good idea. And like now it's just really fun to watch them on social media, and like the way they use their voice, and like all the different like fun, like empowering, like innuendos that they do. It's so fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we are coming to the end of our time, so I just want to wrap up with your advice, which was to
fill in the blank. I'm all, yeah, what did I say?
We've gone 6 different directions. Number 1, white label. Consider white labeling before you get into manufacturing and formulating your own product.
If you're going to go into manufacturing, maybe consider not being so tied down to one single brand, right? Have some flexibility in case that brand doesn't take off the way you thought it would. Do that. Second is that if you're coming into this with a brand, consider having somebody white label it for you. Somebody who's an expert in that particular niche, whether it be vape pens or concentrates or edibles or whatever that may be. Then, and then third is that if you are going to launch a brand, please find a partner that like understands this market and understands how to pull data in a very effective way, because the nuances to this, it's amazing. And you can spend a considerable amount of money going down the wrong path. And honestly, at this point, I would say like time is far more critical than money. It's all the market is still new enough, but still it's starting to become seasoned. Everybody's kind of, preparing. And so I would argue that speed to market is far more important than possibly saving a buck here and there. But at the same time, it's like, if you lose your money, then all you got is time.
It's a balancing act for sure. Well, thank you so much, Salwa. It's been awesome talking with you, and I look forward to having you on a proper Mentor Monday very soon.
Thank you.
All right, ladies, we've got another interview coming up right on the heels of this one at 3:30. We have Wendy Kornberg. She's the CEO of Sunibus Farms, and she is going to be talking to us about cultivation. All right, we'll see you in a few minutes. Bye-bye.